So looking this morning, going to be looking at the life of Jacob, and there's certainly a lot about Jacob that we could spend some time looking at. We're going to touch on a big portion of his life, but I wanted to start, if we could, in the Gospel of Luke chapter 20. Looking at Luke chapter 20, verses 34 to 38. And Jesus said to them, "The sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain to that age and to the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. For they cannot die anymore, because they are equal to angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. But that the dead are raised, even Moses showed in the passage about the bush, where he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is not God of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him." Going back to Exodus chapter 3, verse 6, it's the call of Moses. Exodus chapter 3, verse 6, and this is the account. I'm going to start with 5. Then he said, "Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." And he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So we see that the Sadducees, in the first account that I read in Luke chapter 20, they're coming to Christ, and there was a certain segment of the Jewish leadership that did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. And so Jesus brings to their remembrance Moses at the burning bush. And if you remember, Moses was in the wilderness on the backside tending to his flock, and he saw this strange occurrence. He saw this bush that was on fire, but it was not consumed. And so when Moses, he goes to this bush, and God begins to have a conversation with him and says that I am going to call you to deliver the Israelites out of the hands of Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And when he is there, and Moses is there, God introduces himself in this way, and he says, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so when Jesus is contending in the Gospels, he brings to the Sadducees' recollection, listen, God himself proclaims that I am the God of the living. And so even though Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had passed away, God proclaims that they are alive. And brothers and sisters, we can take out of that this morning a great hope that our lives go far beyond what we live in this natural physical body. That one day we will go to be with the Lord, and we will live with him for eternity if we have faith in him. But what Jesus was referring to, and even what God was referring to, goes much deeper and much greater than resurrection life. What Jesus was referring to, and what God was referring to when he spoke to Moses, was this, is that I have made a covenant with these men that I am obligated to fulfill. I have made a covenant with them that I am obligated to fulfill. That there was a purpose in Abraham, Isaac and Jacob's life. And brothers and sisters, there is a purpose in your lives this morning. You are not here just simply to eat, breathe, sleep, and exist. But God actually has a destiny and has a purpose for you. And it's not just that you would accept Jesus and die and go to heaven either. If we feel that the Christian life is limited to that, I am telling you, you will have a very shallow existence as a Christian. You may get to heaven, but your life will be very limited because God has so much more for each one of you that are in this room today. Not only that, but I believe that God has a greater purpose collectively for Valley Alliance Church. You are not here just because there's a good preacher. You're not here just because you like the people next to you. You know, as a matter of fact, I would even argue that if you're here because you like the preacher and if you like the people that are here, you're really missing the purpose of being here. Because, listen, God can call us to difficult situations. You know, He can call us to be in an environment where we really don't like the people around us. Think about that for a second. And if you look at the life of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, do you know what it was met with? It was met with difficulty. It was met with challenges. Challenges that most of us in this room will never face. And we don't have time to get into all three of them. But Abraham, if you really want to comprehend what faith means, and if you really want to understand faith and the challenges that it comes with it, you need to read the life of Abraham. And even Isaac, and even though Isaac did not face the challenges of his father Abraham, and just to make that clear, Isaac was the son of Abraham, and Jacob was the son of Isaac. But even Isaac had to contend with the nations that were around him. He had to fight with them over a well. He dug a well, they filled it up. He had to dig another well, they filled it up. Then he went and he dug another well, and they filled it up. There was always this contention, there was always this striving, there was always this spiritual struggle that these men faced. And brothers and sisters, I don't want to stand up here this morning and give you this fluff and this happiness and tell you that your life will not be faced with challenges, because it will be. It will be. But in that, and in those challenges, do you know what happens? You grow closer to the very living God. Think about that. In those challenges and in that struggle and in that strife, you grow closer to the living God. What is our great reward this morning? If I was to ask you, what is your great reward? What is your great reward? Heaven? Heaven? So listen, a lot of people will say heaven. Anybody see the movie Miracle? I watched it with my kids this past week. Anybody see the movie Miracle? It's about the 1980 U.S. hockey team that beat the Russians. So the coach of this team brought all of these college players together. And throughout the movie, he asked these college players, what's your name and where are you from? And the one player said, well, I'm from the University of North Dakota. And the other said, well, I'm from Boston, and I go to that college. And so every single one of those people had an identity. And the coach recognized that they were not coming together as one unit. They were not coming together as one team. And so you know what he did? He challenged them. And there's a story in the movie, and it's a true story, that the team had played a game, and they tied 3-3. And during that game, the players were on the bench, and they were, pointing out the good-looking girls in the crowd, and they were saying, oh, check out the girl. And they tied, and the coach became very frustrated. And so he kept them after the game, and he started making them do sprints on ice skates. And, in football, we would call them ladders, or, the name I grew up with, it was suicides. They don't allow you to say that anymore. But, basically, you keep running until you can't run anymore, and you go up and back and up and back. And so he had them do that after the game that they had just played. And This wasn't in my notes. I just felt that I should bring it out, so I apologize. But, so, he stayed there. The coach kept him there, and everybody was angry at the coach. The players were angry, the assistant coaches, and like the guy that like ran the arena where the ice rink is, he shut the lights off. But you know what the coach made them do? The coach made them keep doing these sprints on skates until they were passing out. And one of them finally stood up, and he said my name, and he said, "I play for the United States of America." Heaven is not your reward. Jesus Christ is your reward. Now, is heaven part of it, and are we thankful for that? It is. But you know that God wants us to get to the point that we understand that our great reward is Him. It's Him. But you know, oftentimes we as Christians, you know what we do? We take Jesus as a means to go to heaven. Is He a means to go to heaven? Absolutely. But the Bible speaks of Him as being the head of the body. The Bible speaks of Him as being our husband, the one that we are married to. Our great reward is nothing more or nothing less, because there is nothing more and there is nothing greater than Jesus Christ. And I want to look at the life of Jacob this morning. If we could turn to Genesis chapter 25. Genesis chapter 5, verses 21 to 34. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is thus, why is this thing happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other." And then this is what it says: "The older shall serve the younger." This is the opposite of the way that things were established from the beginning. It would always be that the younger male child would inherit the throne, if I could say it in those terms. But God is saying to Rebekah that this is different. I am doing something that goes against the norms. I am going against what everybody expects the way it should be. I am doing something different in the lives of these children. When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, a child coming out of the womb holding his brother's heel. So his name was called Jacob. And that word Jacob means supplanter or deceiver. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skilled hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of the stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore, his name was called Edom. Jacob said, being the supplanter, being the deceiver, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? Jacob said, swear to me now. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Moving forward, Genesis chapter 26, verses 34 and 35. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. So we see the character of Esau that's coming out. He comes to the tent and he wants his brother's stew. Now let's really kind of think about this for a second. He can get to his brother's tent to get stew. Do you think it would be really that much difficult for him to go a little bit further to ask his mom or father for something else? And it shows the condition of Esau's heart, that the inheritance that God wanted to give to him was somewhat frivolous. Or maybe not frivolous, but maybe he just expected it. There was nothing that he had to do to earn it. There was nothing that he had to do to gain it. It was just automatically going to be his. And then later on, we see that he married and took to himself from the tribes that were probably enemies even going back to Abraham. Wives. He took wives and he went after the women from the tribes that were not pleasing to his parents. And it says that these wives that Esau took, right, they caused Isaac and Rebekah bitterness. And so you find a man that really wasn't going after the purposes of God with all of his heart. And this is something that God discerned even from the womb. And don't ask me to explain that, I can't. I don't know how God can know the heart of a child. And if you go on later in life, we do see that even though Esau does not gain the inheritance that Jacob has, that God does bless Esau. It says that God will make him a mighty nation. But in the purposes of God, there was something in Esau's heart where he just really wasn't willing to chase after God with all of his being. And even at this point in Jacob's life, he wasn't either. It says that Jacob was a supplanter. He deceived his brother. Listen, a good brother would have fed his other brother without expecting anything in return. So Jacob wasn't a good guy either. Listen, his name was Jacob, which meant supplanter, which meant deceiver. Basically, his name meant you're a liar. How would you like to be born with that name? You're a liar. You're a supplanter. You deceive to take. You know, and what's interesting is that we're going to continue reading and find out what happens. Chapter 27, 1 through 13. I know I'm reading a little bit today, so just bear with me. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see, he called Esau his older son and said to him, my son. And he answered, here I am. And he said, behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare me delicious food, such as I love, and bring it to me, so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die. I'm going to just kind of explain the story now and not read all of it just for time's sake, but I would encourage everyone to read chapter 27. Chapter 27. So, we know early on in the beginning of Jacob and Esau, right? God spoke to their mom and said, listen, the younger, right, is going to rule over the older. This was the word of the Lord that came to Rebekah. This is what God said. And I don't know what happened, but somewhere along the way, Rebekah and Jacob didn't have this conversation with one another. And here at the end of, not Jacob, excuse me, Isaac, I apologize. Here at the end of Isaac's life, it shows, and it says that his eyes are growing dim, and he sends Esau to go out into the field to hunt and to bring him back a meal, because he loved the food that his oldest son would make, and he liked everything about his oldest son. His oldest son was a hunter, and he went out, and he probably had that warrior spirit. He probably had that strong, independent spirit that dads love about their kids. That go-get-em attitude. And Isaac was fully intending to give the birthright to Esau, even though God said that Jacob was the one to get the birthright. So somewhere along the way, Mom and Dad didn't communicate. And so, knowing full well that Isaac was about to give the birthright to Esau, Rebekah conspired with the deceiver. And she said, listen, I want you to go and put some animal garments on yourself to make you all hairy, and we're going to take this animal, we're going to slaughter it, and you're going to go in, and you're going to appear to your father as Esau so that you can give the blessing. So Jacob goes in, like him and his mom plan, and they go before Isaac, and Isaac, not being able to fully see or to really understand what was going on, blesses Jacob and gives Jacob the birthright. Now, even though this was prophesied, and even though God spoke to Rebekah and said that this is what's supposed to happen, Rebekah and Jacob did this all in their own strength. They did it by deception. They did it without being honest. Brothers and sisters, when God speaks to you and He says to you that there's an inheritance and there's a plan and there's a purpose in your life, you better not go about doing it in your own strength or by your own means. Did you hear that? You know, oftentimes we grow impatient with God. You know, from an early age, in my early 20s, I desired to pastor. And to be a senior pastor of a church. And when I was about 39, a friend of mine said to me, if God said to you that I don't want you to pastor, would you be willing to listen? And I looked right at him and I said, there's no way. Did you just really say that? Yes, I said that. I said, because that desire that was in me, I know without a shadow of a doubt, was given to me by God. And if you think back to the story of Abraham, Abraham was given Isaac, and God said, I want you to kill Isaac. But even though Abraham was asked by God to kill his son, the inheritance, everything about the promises that God gave to Abraham were to come through Isaac. Abraham, by faith, knew that somehow or another, God would raise Isaac back up. And so, when I said that to my friend, I didn't mean it in such a way that I wasn't willing to die to that desire. But I knew that it was so birthed, and it was so strongly birthed into me, that I would never give up faith in God, that one day He would open up the doors for me to shepherd His people. I don't say that out of pride. I don't say that out of arrogance. You know, it's interesting because in my early 20s, I had a lot of friends that passed me by that were pastoring churches and pastoring churches for years. And I would be angry with God at times, and I would say to God, what are you doing? Why is this taking so long? So, we'll get into that a little bit more. But looking at Genesis 27, verses 41 and 46. Esau had come back in from hunting and had found out that Isaac had blessed Jacob and given the birthright to Jacob, meaning everything was going to be given to Jacob. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching, then I will kill my brother Jacob. But the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob her younger son and said to him, behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, arise, flee to Laban my brother in Haran, and stay with him a while until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring him from there. Why should I be bereft of you both in one day? Then Rebekah said to Isaac, I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women, like these, one of the women of the land, what good would my life be to me? So we see that in Rebekah's heart and mind, she wants everything that she can do, and with all of her longing, to preserve Jacob's life. And you can see in her heart how much Esau displeased her, because she says this, what if I lose both of my sons in one day? So it wasn't that she fully hated him, but there was just this sore displeasure in her because Esau wasn't following really in the ways of God. But it's interesting because her and Jacob conspired in deceptive ways and by deceptive means and using their own minds to contrive and to conceive and try and plan out how Jacob is going to become first. Brothers and sisters, God does not want us to strive to see his promises fulfilled in our lives. Listen to this very carefully. He does not want us to strive to see the promises fulfilled in our lives other than striving with him. We're going to get into that. The way we see God's promises fulfilled in our lives, the way we see the inheritance that God has for us come to fruition, to come to life, is only in striving with him. But you know what we like to do with people? We like to strive with them. And we like to come up with our own means to get what we want. And even at times to get what we think that God wants for us. So, Jacob flees. In Genesis chapter 28, he flees. And there's a lot here that we can get into, but we're not going to because I want to get to another passage of Scripture, but I just want to bring this up. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth. And the top of the ladder reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, I am the Lord, listen to this, the God of Abraham your father, the living Abraham, and the God of Isaac, the living Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south, and you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So I want to pause there. Jacob is running from Esau because he's afraid that Esau is going to kill him. And Jacob is a deceiver. But here in Jacob's wickedness, because there was wickedness in his life, the supplanter, the one that would try and force his way to make things happen for himself. God in his grace, knowing that even though there's this wickedness that's in Jacob, knows that he has a vessel that he can work with. Not like Esau, because Esau was willing to reject his birthright, which was the very purposes of God, right? The birthright was what God needed. He needed to have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which eventually would lead to Christ. But in Esau's heart, he didn't really fully embrace that purpose or calling. He wanted the blessings of it. He wanted the natural rights to it. But he never really in his heart really could grab a hold of the purposes of God. So Jacob, even though there's this wickedness working within Jacob's life, deep down inside, I believe that there was an understanding of him of what that birthright meant. But he tried to do it in sinful ways. He tried to do it in wicked ways rather than allowing God to just work it out. And you know what? When we are born again, when we truly give our lives to God, is there still some ways about the way we do things? That wasn't a very good sentence. Are there still things in ways within us that are ungodly? And do we still try and use those talents and those ways and those means to get what we think we deserve spiritually? Yeah. You know, you look at the church out in the world and some of the things that they do to try and build the church and just draw numbers in, they compromise the gospel. Let's make our services fun and joyful, where everybody will want to come and everybody will be entertained, but they're not really preaching the gospel. Now, Scripture tells us that He will build His church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Who builds the church? Do we build the church the way that the world builds corporations, or does God build the church? God has to build the church, and our dependence needs to be upon Him to build the church. It's not to say that you don't use human means to do things. It's not to say you don't use television and radio and internet. It's not saying that those things are sinful. But we better know that that's what God wants us to do. And the heart behind what we do better be right. So God had to begin to deal and to work with Jacob. There was a seed there. There was a deposit there. There was something good. But all of this stuff, all of this junk that was surrounding that seed had to be dealt with. So continuing on, and I know this is long today, but I really feel that the Lord wants us to penetrate into our hearts. And behold, the Lord stood above it. This is Genesis chapter 28, verse 13, speaking of the ladder, the vision. And said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. The nations of the earth will be blessed. Verse 15, behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from the sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. All right, Jacob's waking up. God reveals himself, he's waking up, and he's thinking to himself, wow, surely God is in this place. And God comforts him and says, I will be with you every step of the way. Brothers and sisters, I want to proclaim to you that from here forward, that God, as you chase after him, will be with you every step of the way. Who can say amen? Amen. Do you believe that? All right. So here's the sad part. I will be with you every step of the way, but that does not mean that there are not going to be difficult times and that I'm not going to bring challenges to your life to make you into the person that I want you to be. Think about this. Man, I wake up from this dream, I see God up in heaven, I see the angels ascending and descending, I have this epiphany, I have this great revelation, I'm like jumping up and down because I'm so excited that I got to see God. And he says, I'm going to be with you every step of the way. What is Jacob's name? Deceiver, supplanter. What still has not been dealt with? Jacob being a deceiver and a supplanter. When we come to Christ, we are not fully dealt with. We still have things that got to be dealt with. They got to be worked out of our lives. I still have things that need to be worked out of my life. Spend enough time with me or my family and you'll find that out really quick. So I'm not going to read it, but in the next chapter, Jacob goes to Laban, his uncle. And you would think, hey, we're family members. This is all going to work out. So he falls in love with one of his daughters, who is the younger daughter, not the older daughter. So on his wedding day, he goes into the tent to be with his bride and found out that his uncle Laban put his older daughter in the tent. But what's even worse is that Jacob, right, was instructed by Laban that he had to work 7 years to get the one that he loved. So he works those 7 years hoping to get the girl that he loves, the woman of his dreams, Rachel. He goes into the tent, and who is it? It's Leah. So you know what Jacob gets? He gets a good taste of his own medicine. The deceiver is deceived. God is not mocked. What you reap, you will sow. But wait a minute. Just imagine what's going through Jacob's mind. God, back there when I was running from Esau, and I laid my head down on the rocks, I used a stone for my pillow, I was in a miserable situation, and you said that you were going to be with me every step of the way? You said you'd never leave me and forsake me? You said that I was going to be a great nation? I've worked 7 years for this woman, and now I'm deceived? God, where are you? But you know what? We think that when God's with us, everything's going to be happy, joy, lucky. No. Because God is looking for more in each and every one of us. He wants us to grow in our relationship with Him. Heaven is not our great reward. Jesus is our great reward. And the more we die to ourselves, the more we know Jesus. Think about that for a second. So then, Jacob, really loving Rachel, agrees to work 7 more years. So now Jacob has 2 wives. And so out of this deceit, he has 2 wives. And out of this marriage, to these 2 women come 12 kids, 12 boys. They become the 12 tribes of Israel. And so you can see that in all of this stuff, this baggage that we carry, if we yield ourselves to God and let Him do a work in our lives, He begins to transform us and He makes us into the people that He wants us to be. What is God's desire that you and I look like? Christ. He wants us to look like Christ. Not be the Christ. No one can ever do that. But He wants us to look like Christ. So He works a total of 14 years. Moving to Genesis chapter 31, verses 1 through 3. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's, he gained all of his wealth. If you read the account, Jacob worked diligently and worked hard for everything that he had. And he actually didn't deceive anybody. But you know, if your name is Deceiver, what do you think everybody thinks of you? What do you think follows you the rest of your life? Deception. You're a deceiver. This guy, he's always lied. He's always going to continue to lie. Think about in Acts. When Paul was converted to Christianity, what did the Christians think about Paul? They were afraid of him. They thought that Paul was going to persecute them and that he was just lying to them, right? So that name, who you are, follows with you. And oftentimes it's a great struggle for us to get rid of the name that we carried with us. So pressure builds and Jacob has to leave, and he leaves. And he says this in verse 3 of chapter 31. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. I'd be like, God, where were you the last 14 years? How did you allow me to be deceived? And a woman was forced upon me that I didn't love. I didn't want her to be my wife. Then I had to work another 7 years after I made an agreement to work the first 7. But you know what was beginning to work in Jacob's life? You know why I believe he was willing to work those 7 years into 14 years? Now, obviously, some of it was like, wow, look at her. She's pretty hot. So he's willing to work the 7 years because he thought this girl was attractive, right? But I believe that Jacob was beginning to realize that even though he was deceived, that it was wrong. That you know what? Those characteristics are in me as well. The Jacob that we knew, right, back when he was with Rebekah, probably would have deceived and tried to connive his way out of it even further. But you know what? He didn't. It wasn't fun walking through what he walked through, but he willingly walked through it, and he willingly walked with God. And here we see the pressure mounts, and God shows up and says, it's time for you to leave, and I will be with you. He's going back home. So what do you think Jacob's biggest concern is with going back home? Esau. Because who wanted him dead? Esau. So, looking at chapter 32, verse 1. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's camp. So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Brothers and sisters, in our journey to get to know Christ better, even though it will be met with difficult times and challenges, do you know, each step along the way, do you know what God does? He reveals more of himself to you. And we can see that in Jacob's life. Each step of the way, even though there were these things that God wasn't pleased with, that God had to work out each step of the way, he was still showing himself and still revealing himself to Jacob. Brothers and sisters, when we go through these difficult times and these challenges in our lives, oftentimes God's working things out of us because those things get in the way of us fully seeing who he is. So, the main crux of what I wanted to get to today, and I know it's been long getting there, but looking at Genesis chapter 33, starting at verse 22. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. All night long Jacob wrestled with a man. And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob," meaning supplanter or deceiver. And then the man that Jacob wrestled with said to him, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel." There's a nation in the Middle East today called Israel. "But your name shall be called Israel, and this is what it means, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." I want you to think about this for a second. You know what happens to some of us when difficult situations come into our lives? Do you know what we do? What do we do when difficult things happen to us? How many of us quit? Anybody ever quit? So I know a lot of people that began the race, that began to follow Christ, but then when things began to become tough, or doubt would creep in, do you know what they did? They stopped wrestling with God. God will show himself to you in every step along the way. But that doesn't mean that every step along the way is going to be pie in the sky. It doesn't mean that everything that you do as a Christian is going to work out just the way you want it. But when those difficult times come, and often though, when these difficult times come, it's because God is wanting to work something out of us so that more of him can be seen in us. But the question this morning is this, is that when things become difficult and everything around you seems to be falling apart and not going your way, you have 2 choices. You can walk away from God and you can give up. Like Esau did, willingly ready to give up his birthright because he was hungry. Very frivolously, very quickly willing to give up his birthright because he was hungry. Or not being obedient to his parents and chasing after women from another tribe that they were not supposed to do. You want to be like Esau, or when you're facing those challenges and God wanting to deal with things in your life, are you going to wrestle with God? And what's interesting here is that this man that wrestled with Jacob, right, says that he did not prevail. Well, we think, well, how can a man wrestle with God and not prevail? But then in the next sign, it says he took his, this man that Jacob wrestled with, took his finger and just touched his head. So God always had the power, right, to control Jacob. This man, he could have ended this wrestling with Jacob 2 minutes into it. 2 minutes into it. He could have said, sit down, Jacob. But God was looking at Jacob and wondering, how bad does this Jacob really want what I am offering him? How bad does he really want it? And when it says there that this man knew that he would not prevail with Jacob, it wasn't that this man couldn't have taken Jacob out like that, because he did when he inflicted the wound on his hip. But he was wondering, how bad does Jacob really want this? So the question to you this morning is, how bad do you really want Jesus? I'm not talking about getting saved and going to heaven. We're not challenging that this morning, but how bad do you really want him in your life? Are you ready to go the distance? Are you willing to fight with him all night long until he blesses you? And when I made that statement to my friend who's a pastor as well, that even if God said, I don't want you to be a pastor, I said to him that I still know that God wants me to be a pastor. And I was willing to fight with God until it was accomplished. That's not the end. That's just one step in my life, you know, because there's still a lot of things in my life that God needs to work out. I still am not the image of Jesus Christ. Are you willing to struggle and fight until you prevail with God? Think about that. You know, we often think it's just about us receiving that free gift of salvation, which is a free gift, which we receive just by faith. But there's a fullness there. There's so much more there for you and me. Are you willing to strive for that? And it says this, his name was changed. And his name was called Israel, because he strove with man and God and prevailed. Meaning that there was something in Jacob's heart that was not going to quit until he fully received the inheritance. Looking at chapter 32, verse 29, then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. So we see here that Jacob recognizes that the very one that he wrestled with was God. And the sun came up. Brothers and sisters, when we go through those difficult times, when God's trying to get something out of us, do you know what eventually comes up? The sun. The sun speaks of a new day. It speaks of you taking that next step and being a little bit closer to God. But you know, there's something else that came with that new day. And it was a limp in Jacob's walk. So brothers and sisters, you know what that speaks of? It speaks of a blow to our flesh. It speaks of a broken, wounded body. Is our strength in our own flesh, in our own body, or is our strength in Jesus Christ? You know? And to get to that point where God could really do in our lives what he wants to do, it's going to come with a cost. You're going to walk with a limp. You're going to be a broken human being in the flesh. And you're going to understand and realize that you can do nothing in human strength. It only comes through God doing it in your life. So brothers and sisters, wrestle with God. If it's been a long time since you've really experienced the blessings of God and you just kind of feel like your life is just kind of broken and miserable, wrestle with God. And let him know, I am not going to give up until I get to know you a little bit more. Because Jesus is our great reward. Amen? Amen.